Hello, my name's Simona Millam and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this session where we're going to look at how customers acquire Microsoft Azure services through the open programs. And when I say the open programs, I mean all of them. So that's regular open as well as open value and open value subscription. We'll see that customers who have an existing agreement can use these agreements to buy Azure, and customers signing new agreements can add Azure services whenever they want to. In this session, we'll first of all tackle the question of what Microsoft Azure actually is and how customers license and buy the Azure services. Then we'll put it into the context of the open programs and we'll look at how customers can estimate the amount of Azure services they'll need and then how they pay for these services. And we'll see that that's either via a monetary commitment or by making a direct payment. Let's start with considering what Microsoft Azure actually is. This phrase is taken from the customer-facing external website on Azure and has some key words that help us to understand what Azure actually is. First of all, it's Microsoft's cloud platform, so this is a set of data centers hosted by Microsoft across the world. And what does it offer? It's essentially a collection of services. You can see the key areas here, so compute, storage, data, networking and app, that enable customers to extend and enhance their IT infrastructure. Now today there are many services offered on Azure, and Satya famously said that Azure services were being added at a rate of 1 every 3 days. We'll consider some specific examples of those services on the next slide. And why are these services useful and important to customers? Well, there are some benefits listed here. So customers get agility with Azure, allowing them to respond to changes in their markets very quickly, which often allows them to do more and save money. And again, on the next slide, we'll see how that happens with some practical examples. Let's use this slide to see some of the Azure services in action. We saw that Azure is Microsoft's cloud platform. So here you can see the extremely large data center of servers in the cloud, obviously not all physically located all in one particular location, but spread around the world. But what sort of services are we talking about? Let's look at some examples, starting with Azure for websites. It's a simple example to start with. So customers might use Azure to host their website, but surely the vast majority of websites are hosted already. So what's special about Azure? Well, for one thing, customers have complete flexibility in the capacity of their website. Imagine they've launched a new product and it's much more successful than they ever dreamed of. There are lots and lots of people accessing that website, therefore. So if you've got a more traditional fixed capacity site, it could crash or run very slowly. But with Azure, you can instantly increase the capacity or even have it happen automatically, so you don't have to worry about a thing. Or you might use Azure to host and build mobile applications. Literally within minutes, you can store data in the cloud, authenticate users and push notifications to millions of devices. You can imagine that this service could be used by a single developer, and it gives her a chance to use Microsoft's infrastructure without her having to get some servers and all of the hassle that comes with those. Equally though, Azure is great for companies who do have their own data centers and they want to extend their data centers for specialist tasks. This could be for big data, hugely large amounts of data that need to be stored and analysed. And you can imagine it's often attractive to just rent this facility rather than setting up another data center. And what about storage and backup? Again, you're not having to manage the machines or storage devices yourself, and this would definitely count as an off-site backup. And again, the benefit with Azure is that you can scale up at a moment's notice. And the final example that's very popular is using Azure to host virtual machines. And again, you can imagine that a company could use Azure to extend their existing server farm. They don't have to go to procurement and spec out a new piece of hardware and wait for it to be delivered. They can just take a couple of minutes to configure a virtual machine on Azure and it's immediately available. So Azure is Microsoft's cloud platform, offering customers a whole range of services for them to extend and enhance their IT infrastructure, whether it's extending their on-premises server farm in a whole variety of ways, or simply hosting a website or using any of the other cloud-based services. Let's now look at how the Azure services are licensed and bought by customers through the open programs. So, how are the Microsoft Azure services licensed? Firstly, there are some services that are licensed on a consumption basis and others are licensed on a per user basis. Let's take some examples. Firstly, here are some examples of services that are licensed on a consumption basis, so the more you use, the more you pay. For example, if a virtual machine is up and running in Azure, then it's charged according to an hourly rate on a per minute basis. The same goes for websites and databases. And the final example, storage, is charged at an amount for the total size of the storage and then by transactions, so reading and writing data to the storage. And what about the user license services? Here you can see that Azure Active Directory and Azure Rights Management are examples of services that are licensed with user SLs. And how does the payment work? Well, for the consumption-based services, there's a payment made up front called a monetary commitment. Then, as a customer uses the Azure services, they are paid for out of this monetary commitment. We'll look in a bit more detail in a moment as to how this actually works. And then the user licensed services are bought as user SLs on a per user per month basis and behave in the same way as the online services such as Office 365. It's important to note that while all of the services on this slide are Azure services, they are paid for in different ways, and the monetary commitment cannot be used to pay for any Azure services USLs, just the services designated as consumption services. As we've said, the Azure services licensed with USLs work in the same way as online services, but let's now take a closer look at how customers pay for the consumption services in the open programs, because this is different to the way anything else works from a licensing perspective. Let's spend some time on the key things you need to know about buying the Azure consumption services through the open programs. So the first is that, as we've seen, the payment mechanism is through a monetary commitment. So the customer pays a certain amount for Azure services up front, and then, as they use any of the Azure services, the amount that is owed is decremented from this monetary commitment amount. And the customer chooses exactly how much they want to pay up front, and you'll see that the amount they've paid then remains valid for 12 months. The second box on this slide confirms that this single payment can then be used for any of the Azure services available through the open programs, which actually is just about all of them. Now, the next question that usually occurs to people is, how do you know how much monetary commitment to make? Well, you can make an estimate of likely consumption, and I'll show you an example of that in a moment. But as you can see from the final box on this slide, it's not the end of the world if you don't get the estimate quite right, since you can add additional monetary commitment at any time, and we'll see that there are a couple of different ways of doing this. Note also that a customer never commits to any minimum spend on Azure. They can use what they like, when they like. Let's take a look at how you might estimate the amount a customer might spend on Azure services to give them an idea of how much monetary commitment to buy. So this example is about Azure virtual machines, and you can see that this customer wants a medium-sized Azure virtual machine. In fact, if you look at the pricing page at the bottom of the screen, you'll see that we've actually taken an A2 virtual machine. This is one with 2 cores, 3.5 gigabytes of RAM, and with a 60 gigabyte hard disk. The pricing is listed as, in US dollars, 18 cents an hour, and you'll see the calculations at the bottom here. So if I were to run that machine for 24 hours a day in a 31-day month, it would cost about $134 a month. Then this customer also wants to buy some additional storage, and they've chosen Azure Page Blob Storage. There are actually 4 types of storage, and this is the one that they have deemed most suitable for this task. And again, you can see the price is just 5 cents per gigabyte, so if they're estimating that they want a terabyte of storage, then that's a cost of $50 a month. So, in total, this customer can assume that a good estimate of usage of Azure services would be about $184 per month. If they were to purchase, say, an initial amount of $500 worth of monetary commitment, then they should expect to top this up within 3 months, and as we'll see, this is actually easy for them to do. Here's a scenario of a customer who has estimated that they will use $50 of Azure services each month. Now, to make this easy, let's imagine that on the 1st of January, this customer buys $600 of Azure monetary commitment from their partner. This is a good estimate for the year since it's 12 times $50, of course. When they're deciding how much to order from their partner, they can order $100 amounts of the monetary commitment. So this particular order is for 6 of the monetary commitment SKU. The customer then receives a single online services activation key which unlocks $600 of a monetary commitment to spend on Azure services. Now, this monetary commitment purchase needs to be used within 12 months of when it's activated. It doesn't have to be activated straight away, but the clock starts ticking from when it is. Our customer decides to activate the key they receive straight away, and so they need to use the $600 for Azure services before the end of December. You'll see that I haven't marked the agreement anniversaries on this diagram, and that's for a reason. The monetary commitment needs to be purchased under an active agreement, but isn't tied to its anniversaries, just to the 12-month deadline after activation. Our customer really is the perfect customer and uses exactly $50 of Azure services per month through the year. Now you can see on the diagram that the next important month is November. When a customer starts using Azure, they get access to the Azure Management Portal to handle tasks such as the administration of domains and subscriptions. Now, although it's a customer portal, a customer can elect to have a partner manage their account on their behalf if they want to. But another thing you can do in this portal is to set up configurable alerts that notify you when the monetary commitment balance is low, and that's what's happened on this diagram in November. The customer has received an email to alert them that there's just $50 left on the balance. You can see that they have chosen to have these alerts go to their partner to help keep track of the balance and to advise on adding further monetary commitment. Now, this customer has great plans for Azure and wants to use it a lot more in the coming months, which they estimate will cost about $100 a month. So in November, they buy $1,200 of monetary commitment, which of course takes their balance at that point to $1,250. And if they choose to activate it straight away, then it will last for 12 months from that point. But what happens to the remaining $50 on the original balance? Well, that's used first, and then the new monetary commitment will be used. This is important since you can see from the diagram that if the monetary commitment is not used in the 12-month period, there is no rollover and the customer would lose any remaining balance. Now, if you're wondering about cancellation of the monetary commitment, that is possible as long as the customer has not activated their key, in which case they can return the key during the usual return period that open and open value licenses are subject to. Have a look at the left-hand side of the slide now as we recap some of the key points we've learned here. We talked about customers buying monetary commitment and then activating or redeeming the online services activation key, which creates a 12-month consumption period. They can add more monetary commitment at any time and have multiple active subscriptions, but the system will make sure that previous commitments are exhausted first. And this is important since unused amounts can't be rolled over into future periods. And finally, there's a portal for customers, the Azure Management Portal, and as well as the technical management tasks you'd expect to be carried out here, there is the facility for customers to allow their partner access to help with the management, and there's the ability to configure email alerts to advise on monetary commitment balance. Our last topic looks at a facility a customer has to make direct payments for Azure monetary commitment. Now, when is this useful? Well, you should consider it a sort of emergency service. There is no billing in arrears for the Azure services within the open programs. So if a customer runs out of monetary commitment and for whatever reason can't get hold of their partner to order more monetary commitment SKUs, then to avoid service interruption, there is this facility for direct payments to Microsoft. If you look at the diagram here, you can see there's a bit of an emergency in November with a balance of just $5. So imagine the customer can't reach their partner and so buys just one monetary commitment SKU at $100 by supplying their credit card details. And this works in exactly the same way as if they had purchased it from their partner. It's a key that activates the Azure services monetary commitment and lasts for 12 months. That sorts out the emergency, and then the customer goes back to their partner to buy more monetary commitment through existing open or open value agreements. Now you can see a summary of the points we've talked about here on the left-hand side, where you should consider this an emergency option when the Azure monetary balance is very low and the partner is non-contactable. This enables customers to avoid service disruption by purchasing direct with their credit card, and subsequent purchase should, of course, be made through their existing agreements. Well, that concludes this session. Thank you for your time today.